Hello, folks, and welcome back to another episode of the Daily Crypto Byte. Today is Tuesday, April 12th. We've got the market coming back a little bit here after a scary 24-hour period. Bitcoin climbing back above 40K. Alts looking pretty strong here today. Also, we've got some news driving the markets as well in the form of Robinhood adding some new assets. We'll tell you about those and a whole lot more before we get started. CJ, how you doing today, my friend?
Doing well, Monty. Good to see you as always. And yeah, some really interesting price action coming out of the majors, as well as a few altcoins pumping off of Robinhood listings, namely Matic, Solana, Sheeb, and was there one more, I believe?
Yeah, Compound as well. Comp.
Awesome.
So yeah, we'll dive into that. But like you said, CJ, some movement across the board in some of the major assets. Like I said, Bitcoin back above 40K. Also, Bitcoin dominance did a bit of a round trip. It was pretty funny to see. I want to show that chart and talk a little bit about what that means and what we can take away about investor confidence during periods of capitulation like we saw yesterday. So I think today should be a good episode. You want to start us off with some charts or anything you're feeling?
Yeah, I've quite a few charts. So excited to get into this one today.
Cool.
So starting with the S&P 500, this is a pretty ideal setup for bullish, like a bullish reaction rally into potential resistance here at around 4,500. But the reason why I say that is because we have TD by 9 today. Now we are pressing up against the resistance from the 20 smooth moving average. But nonetheless, you look at how far below that moving average we were when we hit that 9, basically in our left shoulder. If you look at this and view it kind of as a inverse head and shoulders pattern, which I think it's sort of becoming. But you look at these 9s and how price has really bottomed and reacted off of them. And, we can see some bullish price action today, even with ARK up over 5% and IWM up over 2%. So, we'll see if we have some continuation here, but you might see this inverted head and shoulders pattern, which is actually pretty bullish formation, despite everybody's like very, very intense fear. Yep, nothing too notable in the oscillators. But I want to get to Bitcoin now and talk a little bit more about the macro trend as well as just some sentiment we're seeing. So we talked about, potential short trades yesterday, or moreover, rather like finding support or basically where not to short. So, what we said yesterday was if there was a level for Bitcoin to bounce, in the interim, it would likely be somewhere around here, roughly, because this is where we found support back in September after our run up. And it's where resistance also occurred back in June during our slump over the course of the summertime. So nice to see some bounce there from the bullish perspective. Pretty wide divergence from the 20 smooth moving average as well. So wouldn't be surprised if we had a little bit of a reaction rally up into that range. But, really interesting with just price moving up on the favorable CPI print this morning. We'll see if that lasts or if the rally gets a little bit more faded here. From a macro perspective, I want to break out a couple of charts, starting with the 1-year hodl wave. So this is one that I'm a big fan of on lookintobitcoin.com. And basically, the definition is that the hodl wave groups Bitcoin by age, and whether it was last moved from one wallet or another over a 1-year period. So in this example, we are looking at the percentage of all Bitcoins that have not been moved from one wallet to another for at least 1 year. And when we have movement from a cold wallet to like a hot wallet, historically, it has been aligned with periods of distribution throughout Bitcoin's history. Now, there are limitations to this model, even though it does have some very nice confluence within the bull markets and bear markets we've seen historically. I think you have to take into account that this can only really account for the supply side. It cannot necessarily account for the demand side and what's going to happen in the future. Nevertheless, I think what this is telling us is that the supply side, or the supply absorption that we've seen by holders holding Bitcoin for longer than 1 year, is continually increasing. So that's bullish from a supply side dynamic. And from a sentiment perspective, it actually is quite bullish as well, despite the fact that in the short term, we have a lot of fear and uncertainty in the markets. But as you can see, classic stage of distribution occurred in 2017 as we are reaching those tops. That's people sending their Bitcoin from cold wallets to exchanges and taking profits. And we saw something very similar actually as soon as we started hitting like 40K, and then especially once we got into the 60s. And finally started to round and bottom out not too long ago. So very interesting and pretty bullish from at least a supply side perspective. Talking about fear and greed, we've been at a very fearful period, but even after now, we are at a score of 20, which is relatively close to what we were experiencing at a lot of these local bottoms throughout the recent downtrend. So just something to take into account. We are very fearful as we reach some of these support levels. So we'll see if this bounce can actually remain with some substance, or perhaps it's just a rally following the CPI print that then gets faded. I think I'm leaning a little bit more towards the former, but we'll see how it ultimately plays out. Monty, any thoughts? Anything you'd like to start off or share with today?
Yeah, I got a couple things, but first, thank you for sharing that information. Always encouraging to see that during a period of capitulation like we saw yesterday, that those long-term holders, their conviction's not shaken. They're still, holding steady, not selling. In fact, they're actually accumulating. So always encouraging to see that. One thing that I wanted to just quickly talk about, because it kind of ties in with what you were mentioning, is Bitcoin dominance. And this is the hourly chart here for Bitcoin dominance. And I find this very interesting how we just kind of did basically a round trip here from 40% to 42.3%, all the way back to 41%. And I think this is a great glimpse into how speculative investors behave during mass capitulation periods, or periods where price is falling sharply. And lots of people yesterday were talking about how with the treasury yields rising, and with the Qs falling, it was a little bit discouraging to see Bitcoin falling as well, not showing any signs of strength independent of those markets. But really, within the crypto market, we're still seeing those dynamics that tell us that Bitcoin is still a store of value amongst the crypto assets. And that's kind of how crypto traders, especially speculative investors, view Bitcoin. Because when the market started to go red, immediately we saw Bitcoin dominance rise. This tells us that the alts are underperforming relative to Bitcoin. They're selling off harder, and Bitcoin is actually holding its value better than a lot of the alts that were selling off very, very hard. So we saw Bitcoin dominance shoot up, all the way up to 42.25%. But then as soon as that favorable CPI print started to hit the market, and as soon as investors were willing to take more risk, we saw Bitcoin dominance just do a round trip right back to where it was. This bullish engulfing candle here at the top of this trend would have been a tremendous indication to start to look to allocate into some of the alts. And we'll talk a little bit more about this on Doge of the Day, but some of these alts looked very resilient even with the market pulling back, the greater market pulling back. Some alts still looked resilient, and some alts this morning made a move back up to where they were yesterday with a lot more speed than some other alts. So, looking at this Bitcoin dominance chart, this point here was a great indication that, perhaps the market was ready to go risk on. Like I said, this is the hourly chart. And as you can see, since then, the alts have been actually outperforming relative to Bitcoin. So although Bitcoin's back above that 40K level, it seems like the thing that's changed most in this last 24-hour period is kind of just the risk appetite of these investors. It got shaken here, last night and yesterday during the day when we saw people, flooding out of the alts and moving into Bitcoin. But today it seems like that risk appetite is back, and that's evident from the alts making a move. And just to tie that in with that news story that we were talking about, CJ, we've got some assets moving on the back of news-related events this morning, and that is Robinhood adding some new tokens available to their massive customer base, and that includes Sheeb, Solana, Compound, and Matic. And if you look at any of the charts of those assets, they are all up very big. Solana up as much as 7% today, actually up almost as much as 9% on the highs today. And Matic as well, also looking very strong. Sheeb is actually the biggest gainer of the day, not surprising given its retail facing nature. But ultimately, as you can see, that Robinhood listing does still have an effect on price. People are speculating on these assets that have just been recently listed on Robinhood. And like I said, they do have a large contingent of, traders on their platform, traders that before this only had exposure to, just a couple of the major assets like Bitcoin, ETH, and then a few others. So opening it up to a few more assets, I think is very good. I think Solana could be a massive benefactor of this because, SHIB is pumping here immediately, obviously up 25%. But I think Solana could actually see a sustained positive increase in speculation from this Robinhood listing. I think Solana is one that, benefits from both institutional and retail speculation. I think it's still significantly off its all-time highs. And as a result, retail traders will be willing to take a risk on this. So the fact that now that it's listed on Robinhood, I think is a very positive catalyst. And I think that in the near future we can expect to see more retail participation in the speculation of Solana. So I like that. I think that's encouraging, and as a result, I think it will lead to a continued grind higher in price. But not too surprising to see SHIB up almost 25% after that listing. That's kind of just the way it goes. People will take those big bets on those high flyers, and as a result, SHIB up 25%. So just a couple of things there, but I will pass it back to you, CJ.
Yeah, I think that's really great for Solana. As much retail capital as it can get, especially in a bullish period of time. You see like the true impact that assets kind of like Ethereum Classic have had on the retail crowd. In many cases, you'll see, Ethereum Classic pump. We just saw it in when it went up, 100% in a little over a week. You saw very similar assets like GME and AMC pumping as well. So it's very similar, a lot of overlap, I think, in those market participants. But overall, thank you guys for watching. Hope you have a great day in the world wherever you're at. If you enjoyed what you saw today, please feel free to like and subscribe. That helps us out and the channel quite a bit. And if you'd like to see more of our trade ideas and trade setups on a daily basis, check out the link in the description below at marketrebellion.com/try crypto. Really appreciate it, and I hope you guys have a good one. We'll see you next time.